Welcome to the Code for Couples podcast, focusing on topics for law enforcement officers and couples to keep you and your relationship connected, resilient, and code for. Now, your host, law enforcement expert Cindy Doyle, author of Hold the Line and My Wife.
Hey there, welcome back to Code for Couples. I am Cindy Doyle, your host, author of Hold the Line. Today, I have on a very special guest, Leah Kaylor, who is a sleep expert. I have been looking for someone who is a sleep expert for a really long time. And my friend Adam Davis, who has been on the podcast a couple of times and helped me to make sure my book got published, connected me with Leah, who has a book coming out. And when she found out my podcast was about first responders and first responder couples, she got more excited even yet because she's like, oh my gosh, yes, we could do the thing. You don't understand how excited I am to talk about sleep and the importance of sleep and how it impacts not just individuals, but relationships as general. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And I think I can match your excitement toe to toe because I love talking about sleep. I love sleeping and I love teaching people about sleep. So I am here for it. I can match your excitement level. Thank you so much for having me. I've been a licensed psychologist for over 6 years. I've been with the FBI and I have come to be known as their sleep expert, which I love. And so everything that I'm going to share with you today is my own thoughts, opinions, whatnot, and don't actually have anything to do with the FBI. So I just want to put that.
Did you hear that legal disclaimer
there
that she had to give there? That's her legal disclaimer.
Indeed.
Let's talk about sleep. Why do you love sleep so much? I mean, besides the physical act of it, but how did you get interested in sleep?
You know, this is a great question. And I wish I could go back in time and remember to tell you the story accurately. But when I was on my residency year at the Memphis VA Medical Center, we had lots of people on their internship year, lots of people on their postdoc year, and we all had to come together in one room and make sure that everyone got the rotations that they wanted during our residency year. And there, as you can imagine, are going to be rotations that are very, very popular and rotations that are maybe not as popular. And everybody has to agree so we can all walk away somewhat happy. And I remember being in this room, but I wish that I could tell you if sleep was one of the ones that I wanted or didn't want. But I ended up on the sleep rotation at the Memphis VA Medical Center. And I just fell in love with it. We did sleep hygiene classes. We did CPAP adherence, helping people who struggle with having a CPAP mask on. I learned how to treat nightmares. I didn't even know that that was a thing. And now helping folks who had struggled with nightmare night after night after night. And I just learned so many incredible techniques to help people that maybe thought that there was no hope for them. And they were just struggling so much. And so that is where my love of sleep really blossomed, was just, I think, realizing that everybody sleeps. So there's something that everybody can learn and everyone can take away. But because we sleep every single night, for those people who really struggle with it, that's such a, like every single night struggling with it, that is so rough. And so I want to be able to help people, whether they're on one end of the spectrum where maybe they can just learn a thing or two about sleep, or people who are on the other end of the spectrum who are really struggling every single night. And I think that there's something that everybody can learn, that everybody can take away.
Let's go to the dark side first. What are some of the problems that develop out of bad sleep habits or nightmares night after night, or, as we age, people have to get up and go to the bathroom, or, even as we're talking about first responders, right? Or law enforcement overall, what are some of the problems that develop out of not having the right sleep or bad sleep habits?
I like to say this: sleep touches everything. I don't think that there's something that you can pick out that sleep doesn't touch. So when people are having poor sleep night after night, maybe you are not performing at your best. Maybe you're a little grouchy. You're not your best emotional self. We could also, if we're talking first responders, like, what about making decisions? And are you making the best decision that you possibly could be? Because there's information out there about the longer that you are awake, and how that kind of correlates, not that you're drunk, but how that correlates with making decisions that you would make kind of under the influence, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Also, slowed reaction time. We know that that's going to be incredibly important for our first responders. So sleep is touching lots of different things, not to mention putting you at risk for chronic conditions. So people are more at risk for obesity, for heart disease, for having trouble with weight management. I mean, really, you could, again, you gotta buy the book. I have an entire chapter on everything that sleep touches and how incredibly dangerous it is to get poor sleep night after night after night.
I'm even thinking of the compounded nature of, okay, so we have cortisol
Yes.
for our law enforcement officers as a part of hypervigilance, right? Cortisol, the problems with that, with medications that every single first responder, every single law enforcement seems to be on, which is heart medication, right? High blood pressure medication or high cholesterol, right?
Mhm.
So there's two, but now you're saying, oh, by the way, lack of sleep also contributes to that. So
Yes.
they're getting double whammies on their health because not only do we have the cortisol that's already in their system, but now we have lack of sleep that it seems like that just kind of compounds the problem that then impacts their physical health and shortens their life and their time with their family, right?
Absolutely. And I think that sleep should be a time for rest and rejuvenation and a time where the body is repairing itself because we ask the
Mhm.
body to work really hard all day, every day. And at night, when we're moving through the various different cycles of sleep, the body should have that chance to rest and repair. So if you take the example of heart disease, our blood pressure should drop when we're sleeping. The blood vessels should have an opportunity to rest. When we are amped up because of the nature of our work and cortisol is coursing through our body and we are just not able to come back down to baseline,
Mhm.
yeah, that's going to be really dangerous because the body needs that time to repair itself. And we're not allowing for that.
You mentioned two topics that I already want to talk about, which you said sleep hygiene. Talk to us about sleep hygiene and what it needs to look like.
This is going to be a tough one, but this is my absolute top tip. It's not sexy, it's not exciting, but this is my top tip. It's consistency. And I know that this can be very much of a struggle for our first responder populations because there's going to be early morning call outs, late nights, potentially shift work. I get that. But when a person can be consistent with the time that they're waking up and the time that they're going to sleep, that's going to be really important for the body because the body does best when it knows what to expect, when there's this predictability. So that is my first top tip is being consistent. Now, when I say consistency, and this is a real bummer, but when I say consistency, I mean what time you wake up and what time you go to bed, not just weekdays, because I think that's what a lot of people think of is, oh, well, I have to wake up at this time, Monday through Friday, because that's what time I get to work. And then the weekend rolls around and they're like, yeah, I can sleep in. Like, this is great. I'm so glad it's Saturday. No, the consistency also hangs around for
Mm.
Saturdays and Sundays too. And then also holidays. Yes, I know. Real bummer. But just to give you a little bit of an example is for those people who we're just going to take the example of, say, Monday through Friday, they get up at 6 because that is the time in which they go to work. Well, if Saturday rolls around and the person says, oh, well, it's Saturday, I'm going to sleep in. I'm sleeping until 9. So that difference from 6 a.m. until 9 a.m., that 3-hour time difference is basically like the difference between New York and Los Angeles. Like if you were to take a flight, you're essentially putting yourself into this jet lag tailspin. So the body on Sunday is like, oh, well, okay, this is what we must be doing then. We're going to sleep in until 9. Like, okay. And then on Monday, what does the body think that it should be doing? It thinks it should be sleeping in until 9. And then we have this very rude awakening, no pun intended, for 6 a.m. when it's time to get back on our workday schedule. So we're throwing ourselves back into this kind of jet lag tailspin, if you will. And it's just so hard for the body to finally catch up and figure out what's going on if we're not being consistent with the time that we wake up and the time that we go to bed.
How does that work with officers then? In Texas, a lot of times they do they do 12-hour shifts. There's a name for this type of shift, and I can't remember what it is, but it's like on 3, off 2, on 2, off 3, right? And that's the schedule. And there are times when officers are up longer than their shifts because they're on a scene, right? They're having to write reports. So how the hell is that going to happen with our officers?
And this is a struggle, and I don't necessarily have a good answer for you because I do get this question a lot whenever I'm talking to managers and they are in charge of shift work and they have to put people on opposite shifts too, where you're awake when you should be sleeping and sleeping when you should be awake. And unfortunately, when it comes to people who protect the public and who have that type of job where we need to be out and about 24/7 to make sure that things don't go awry and that people are protected, I unfortunately don't have the best answer for you other than when you do have the opportunity to sleep, doing the best that you possibly can to set yourself up for good sleep conditions. And we can talk more about how that plays
Let's
into
do
sleep
that.
hygiene too.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. So when we think about our bedroom, several things need to come into play whenever we're talking about sleep hygiene. First and foremost, and I know that this can be kind of a struggle, but I recommend that folks take everything out of their bedroom that does not need to be there. Essentially, what we want to do is create the strongest association between bed and sleep that we possibly can. And I like to do this exercise when I have a live audience where I'll have a whiteboard and in the middle I will write bed, and then I'll ask people, "Hey, what are all the things that you guys are doing in bed or in your bedroom?" And oftentimes people tell me that they're watching TV, they're scrolling, they're playing games on their phone. Maybe they have workout equipment in their bedroom. Maybe they're answering work emails. There's a lot of different things that people are often doing in the bedroom. And so I will draw lines off of that circle showing all the other things that people are doing. And then I'll ask, well, how strong is the association between bed and sleep if you're doing all these other things in bed? And oftentimes, what is so ironic is that people don't actually tell me sleep when I ask what you're doing in bed. That one just blows me away.
That's funny. I didn't even think about that too. I was thinking about all the different things. I'm like answering email as soon as I wake up in the morning, right? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So whenever I put it in terms of that and kind of draw a visual for folks, I think that they start to understand we need to make it very, very simple for the brain is what we need to do. And so when we can remove things like work papers or work laptop or the TV, which I know can be quite a struggle for folks, and we can circle back to that. When we remove all these other things out of the bedroom, then the brain starts to realize over time, oh, this is the place where I don't have all these choices. There aren't all these other competing, exciting things for me to do. I just sleep here.
Yeah, it's like a conditioned behavioral response. I used to study in my bed. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a dorm room or, a poor college student like I was,
Yes.
I had one room and I stayed in my room and everything happened in my bed. And somebody once told me, stop studying in your bed. Your bed should just be used for sleep. And I was like, what? But my bed is my comfy spot. Right. So you're talking about that idea of it becomes more of a conditioned response that your brain says, oh, this is the bedroom. This is the bed. Maybe we have sexy time. Maybe we're going to go to sleep. I just thought about that. I don't know if you want to answer that or not, but does that cause a problem? Like we're going to have sexy
So
time in the bedroom, but bed is for sleep?
great question. And I call this the 3 S's.
Okay.
The 3 S's are the 3 things you can do in bed: sleep, sex, and sickness. Whenever it comes to being sick and you're not feeling well, you're fighting something off, I don't care. Go ahead and do whatever it is that you need to do to make sure that your body gets back on track and gets the sleep and the rest that it needs to repair itself and fight off whatever it's fighting off. But that's the 3 S's. So those are the 3 things that we should be doing in bed: sleep,
Okay.
sex, and sickness. And you should be doing one of those things every night, which is sleep. And when we get into that, hey, I don't know how lucky you are, but one thing you should be doing every night is sleep. I
Yeah.
don't know what your listeners are up to. Maybe they're getting lucky every night. I don't know.
And kitchen counters and sofas are good for other things too. So,
Shake it
there you
up,
go.
get exciting. I encourage it.
Okay, so we need to make sure that our brain associates
Yeah.
the bed in the bedroom with going to sleep. That's the first part of our sleep health. Okay, good. What
That's
else?
a huge piece of it. So the next piece that we need to do is when I think about the bedroom, it needs to be dark, cool, and quiet. That's what I want for folks. Yes. Dark, cool, and
Love
quiet.
that.
How cold do you think that the bedroom should be?
I'm hoping you're going to say 65 to 64 because that's where I like to sleep.
The research tells us that low 60s is what is ideal for best sleep. Now, there are going to be some people who are listening right now who are like, oh my gosh, whether that's too hot or too cold for them, everyone's going to have a personal preference.
65 degrees. What were the other ones?
Yeah. So we want it to be dark, cool, and quiet.
Dark and
Dark,
quiet. Okay.
dark is going to be very important because people don't realize, but your eyelids are very thin. So I like to say that I want your bedroom to be inside cabin cruise ship dark, like super, super dark. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Like no windows, black.
Because whenever we have little lights, I'm thinking about my bedroom setup. There is a smoke detector like right above my bed, and I put like little stickers over just those little lights because even those things can be kind of disruptive. And I know that that sounds ridiculous. Like, wow, how could something like a teeny tiny light bother you? But whenever there is light in the bedroom, and again, your eyelids are so delicate and so thin that that little amount of light can cause micro awakenings. And so we want to do the best that we possibly can, especially for our first responders, to have the optimal conditions
Mhm.
so that we can stay asleep and we can get that very restorative quality rest. Now, you may be in a situation where you can't control all the light. You know, maybe you're in a hotel and the door, like there's a lot of light
Or maybe
coming
it's
from the
daytime.
bottom. Maybe it's daytime because you're sleeping for shift work. There could be a
Opposite
lot of
shift.
different things going on. What I recommend is an eye mask. Simple, affordable, and it'll get the job done for the most part. Sometimes people feel funny about having something on their eyes. Don't knock it till you try it and give yourself a little bit of time to get used to it. But that is something that I highly recommend for folks. So that's the
Okay.
dark piece. You could also opt for blackout curtains and things like that, but I still think that that's a little bit more of an investment and those ones aren't always foolproof. So I would say just spend a little bit of money on like a nice affordable eye mask.
Love that. Okay. And then the other part you said was quiet. And I'm very curious about this because there are a lot of people now that are using sound machines or especially when we as law enforcement couples, I'm up doing my own thing and my law enforcement spouse is trying to get some sleep. So sometimes sound machines, right? So sound machines are brainwave noises, like there's all these noise things aspects. So quiet, and I want to know what your weigh in on sound machine stuff is.
Yeah. So whenever it comes to quiet, quiet doesn't necessarily mean silence because for some people that can be
Good to
very
know.
anxiety provoking.
Okay.
For some people, I'm going to speak from my own experience. I love complete silence. That's one of the best sounds in the world for me. I love it. Other people, that is very anxiety provoking and it's not okay.
Hmm. Okay.
So when I say quiet, I mean that I would like to maybe have you play some soothing music, maybe some rain sounds or some thunderstorm sounds if complete quiet is not a good idea for you. Like you mentioned, white noise machines, that's a perfectly fine option. Something like a fan, people find that to be very rhythmic and soothing. I'm fine with all of those things. Now, there are some people who like to sleep with the television on, and this is where I'm saying quiet. I love your face. Yeah. We do not want to
No.
sleep with the television on.
Mm-mm.
And some people will say, "Oh, well, I've done it for all these years and it's no big deal." Well, let me tell you why it actually is a big deal. When you sleep with the television on, your brain is wired to interpret language. That's what it does. That's its job. And when it is trying to sleep, but it's also listening to the television, there's this divide of it's being pulled in two different directions. So the brain is interpreting this language, it's listening, it's understanding, and then it can't get fully into those very deep stages of
Mm,
sleep that it should be because it's busy working, it's busy trying to do its job. So I
That
do
makes
not
sense to
recommend.
me.
Yeah, I don't recommend people to sleep with the television on. But then also too, when the television is on, like we talked about having it dark, oftentimes there's going to be lights and motion that are coming from the TV screen. So that's going to be very disruptive. Sometimes the TV program is one volume, but then the commercials are very loud, which can also be very disruptive as well. So there's a lot of things that come along with the television that are just very disruptive. So when I say quiet, it doesn't need to be complete silence. It could just mean some soothing white noise, the sound of a fan, something along those lines. For people who live somewhere that may be kind of noisy, or maybe you're sleeping in a hotel, maybe you live in an apartment building, I'm a very big proponent of earplugs. I know that there are some people who are not open to anything like that. For folks who are not okay with putting something into their ears, another option is kind of looks like a sleep headband almost, and it goes around the head and it has like very, very soft speakers inside. And then you can connect that with your white noise machine or with your ocean sound. So that's another option too. And then you can pull that sleep headband down to also act like an eye mask too. So there's lots of different options for folks. Sounds like maybe you
Yeah.
have
So
one of those.
I have the headband,
Okay.
and the speakers were I got it years ago, like almost a decade ago. And the speakers are too hard, and I know they've come out with other things since, including like
Yes.
the all-in-one eye mask ear speaker thing, really soft.
There's lots of
So
fancy ones nowadays.
yeah. So I knew that was there. I think part of the struggle with that, being married to, and I'm curious, being in law enforcement yourself, I I know my officer wants to be aware. He is absolutely not going to put on any speaker. I mean,
Yes.
he's not going to put speakers in his ears. He might put something on as far as noise. He's actually fine with quiet, but it
Okay.
but he wants to remain somewhat alert. And it was
Mhm.
weird the other night. I was sleeping. I always have water next to my bed. I'm one of those people. And I have a straw, and I was slurping in the straw, and I don't know, made a little whistling sound, and all of a sudden he's like, "What was that?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh. Really?" So I know for him, he kind of remains. I don't think he's yellow, like if we're looking at like Cooper's
Mhm.
colors. I don't think he remains in the yellow when he's asleep, but there is something about remaining slightly alert, I think, when he's asleep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that you're hitting the nail on the head is that whenever it comes to law enforcement and all the things that they encounter all day, every day, that it is so hard to come down to a baseline or to a state of complete relaxation because you've been trained to be
Mhm.
so vigilant and hyper
Mhm.
vigilant, I could say. And so it's paid off for you. It makes sense
Yeah.
for you to be like that. So to turn it off at night can be quite a challenge for our first responders. Yes.
Yeah, just to let it down. Anything else on sleep hygiene that we need to know?
We talked
Any other
dark, cool, and
recommendations?
quiet.
Yep.
Something that I know will be quite a struggle for folks is cutting out blue light before bed. I
Mhm.
know, yeah, I know that people love their screens. And here's the thing, I think when we talk about screens and blue light, everyone's heard it, but I don't think people understand the science behind it and why
Oh.
it's important. And that's what I like to talk about. So, blue light that comes from our screens, whether that's a laptop, a TV, a tablet, a phone, whatever, especially depending upon how close it is to your face. So, if you're watching TV, I hope that it's across the room. But if you're looking at your phone, it's going to be significantly closer to your eyes.
Mhm.
Blue light is the same wavelength as sunlight. And I like, yeah, blue light is the
Wow.
same wavelength as
Oh, that's
sunlight.
not good.
No. So I like to go back to our caveman ancestors. How did they know when it was time to be awake? The sun.
Sun was coming up.
The sun came up. And how did they know when it was time to go to bed?
It was dark.
Sun went
Yeah,
down.
makes sense.
When we are exposed to this artificial light, and now with modern technology, we have the luxury of having light anytime we want it. Because of that, it can throw off our circadian rhythm and really set us up for not great conditions. So if we're getting close to bed and we have blue light, our brain is like, well, I've been awake all day. I probably should be feeling tired, but I'm getting blue light, AKA like sunlight, into my eyes. So that doesn't make sense. And I'm really not sure what I should be doing. So I guess I'll just go with this blue light that is sunlight, and it'll just keep me alert and awake. And that's exactly what blue light does, is that it keeps our brain in much more of an alert state, which is going to be very important for our first responders.
Yes, very much so. I was thinking also about interrupted sleep. And if are there any tips or tricks that you have for interrupted sleep? Because I don't have kids at home. I don't have kids, but I know a lot of my listeners are the spouses. They're there and their first responders not there. Their officer's not there to help out. So they're the ones that are by themselves and getting interrupted sleep. Do you have any tips or tricks for interrupted sleep or things we need to watch out for there?
So when you say interrupted sleep, would that be like you've been sleeping, you woke up in the
Mom,
middle of the night and you can't fall back
Mom.
asleep?
Yes. Yeah. Or like kid comes in, mom, right? And interrupts sleep, or you get a foot in the ribs, those kinds of things.
Yeah, those things certainly happen. I would say if you can, because there will be some people who can fall asleep naturally without much problem. If that is you, fantastic, great. Go ahead and try and fall back asleep. For other people, maybe that kick to the ribs woke you up and now your brain is just going, and we ain't turning it off. If that is you and you're awake in the middle of the night, remember we talked about the association between bed and sleep, and that still counts for throughout the night as well. So one thing we don't want to be doing is laying awake in bed. We've been woken up by the kid, we took care of the kid, and now my brain is just going a million miles an hour. I'm trying to solve all the world's mysteries at 3 a.m. That's not going to be helpful. And that's going to create a poor association between bed and sleep, because now it's like, oh, well, at 3 a.m., like this is what we do, is we think and we solve the world's problems and we go over our to-do list. No. What we need to do is, if you are awake and you're not going to fall asleep in the next 15 to 20 minutes, get up, get out of bed. I know. None of my suggestions are going to be sexy at all. They're going to be annoying. I fully know that. I recognize that. But this is what works. And this is what we know works. So take it for what it's worth. But yes, if you're awake in the middle of the night and in the next 15 to 20 minutes, you're not going to be able to fall back asleep, get up, get out of bed. If you have the luxury of being able to go to another room, that's what I recommend. Keeping the lights in that room dim, and then doing something boring. So no screens, boring. Maybe you are reading a magazine. Maybe you're doing adult coloring. Maybe you are very gently folding laundry. Something boring until you feel sleepy. When you feel sleepy, we go back to the bed, because again, we're trying to create that association between bed and sleep. For some folks, they may have to do this more than once a night, but eventually, and I know that that's highly annoying, this suggestion does work, but only when you stick to it and you stay consistent with it. Because again, we're just trying to train the brain like, oh, all we do is bed and sleep. That's it.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's the thing where I know some of this, and those of y'all listening,
Yeah.
And there's just
revolutionary.
poor habits, right? So one of the things that I changed in the last 2 weeks was my phone is now charged in the kitchen and not at my bedside. And my alarm is not my phone anymore. I have one of those clocks that wake you up gently with light.
Yeah.
I won't say the brand, but which I love. And it has a sound machine and it does all the things, right? But I have been surprised. Now, I will tell you, the first couple nights I sat there, and my husband laughs at me because he doesn't use screens to go to bed. And he falls right to sleep. And I'm always like,
Yep.
But those first couple nights, I was like, oh my gosh. And he looked at me, he goes, you're bored, aren't you? I'm like, I'm so bored. What do you do? Like, what do you do? Just lay here? Because I used to be one of those people that would scroll. That was my time to be like, my body was like, screw you. I can do whatever I want to during this time and
So
already
hard.
see the benefits. And so I love associating like the bed with sleep, the room with sleep, the quiet, the dark, get into these habits, but then also the idea of like, hey, if you wake up, don't just lay there, because that's what I would probably do, is lay there for 45
We
minutes to
all
an
would.
hour
Yeah.
and instead get up, do something boring. I think that's really awesome.
I was just going to mention how you used to have your phone and that was kind of like a way for you to wind down. And I just want to give, again, a little bit more science behind it because I love science and I love the brain. When people are scrolling or watching funny cat videos or whatever, every time you're looking at them, you're getting a hit of dopamine.
Yep.
Dopamine, yeah, is our naturally occurring chemical in the body that is pleasure and it's
That's why we
motivation
all
and it's
scroll.
reward. Yeah. And so each time you see a funny cat video, you're like, yes, or like, show me another, show me another. And the brain just keeps getting these hits of dopamine. Sleep, while incredibly useful for the body, doesn't give you any immediate rewards. So
Mm-mm.
it's so hard to compete with those dopamine releasing activities that you have to force yourself to get out of that habit, just like you talked about you doing for your own routine.
I love the biology with it. And I hope y'all do too. That idea of like, I mean, dopamine or sleep, which one's going to win? Dopamine every single time.
Every
So that makes
time,
sense.
dopamine.
You had mentioned nightmares and of course, dealing with law enforcement and or
Yes.
spouses that maybe struggle with the what ifs or the events that they've been through. What are some of the recommendations you have with sleep and nightmares?
Absolutely. So I think that your listeners would be very interested to hear because this was something I didn't know about until I got to the VA, was that there is treatment for nightmares. Now, I will say this treatment is best used when someone has the same nightmare over and over again. And I realize that that's not everyone, but for, I imagine, a select group of your listeners, that they probably do have this same nightmare over and over again. And for those folks, imagery rehearsal therapy, that's what it's called. Imagery rehearsal therapy is an amazing technique. I have used it many times for people who continue to have that same nightmare or like a variation of it over and over again. And essentially what it is, and I'm going to tell you about it, but I do recommend that folks, if they're interested, work with a trained professional. But the premise of it is actually very simple and easy. And what's happening, again, I'm going to give you a little mini science lesson, is what we think is when we are asleep, people often think that the brain when you turn off your light switch to go to bed, people also think that the brain and the body like also just kind of turn off like that light switch. That's
Mm,
not true at all. The brain and the body are so incredibly active all night long, doing various different, very important functions. And when we are in REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, this is where dreams most typically occur. If you put a cap with electrodes on someone who is in REM sleep and also put a cap with electrodes on someone who was actively awake and problem solving, it would be very hard to tell the difference between both of those brains. That is how
wow.
incredibly active the brain is. Yeah, just let
Okay.
this soak in
Okay.
for a moment. The brain is busy. It's not taking a break. During REM sleep, one of the many things that we think that are happening, because the brain is still very much a mystery to us, is that we are going through events that have happened to us. We are consolidating memory. We are regulating emotions, amongst many other things. And it's believed that folks who have trauma and who continue to have these nightmares is that their adrenaline and their cortisol are very high. At the same time, their brain is trying to process the experiences that have happened to them. And sometimes it gets stuck kind of like a broken record. And that's where we see these nightmares that keep happening over and over again. The brain is trying to heal itself because it's just the right conditions aren't there. The cortisol is too high, the adrenaline is too high. And so we need to do something else to help with that. So getting back to imagery rehearsal therapy, what we're doing is that we are taking the nightmare and with a trained mental health professional, you would pick the dream, you kind of create it in such a way where it either ends in a neutral or a positive manner. And you, again, suspend reality, because whenever it comes to dreams, they're
Absolutely.
often very fantastical. So you can
Yes.
make anything happen in the dream, and we want it to be neutral or positive. So once you work with the mental health professional, you guys come up with a script of, this is how the nightmare normally starts, but instead, this is how we flip the script. Once we come up with this script that we're very happy with, then the person needs to do homework. And that homework is, during the daytime, having relaxed practice and rehearsing that new dream.
Mm,
And we rehearse that for quite a while, because what we believe is that as we rehearse it in the daytime in a relaxed state, maybe even you're listening to some soft, soothing music, eventually it transfers over into sleep, and that the brain is like, oh, okay. And it kind of adopts this new neutral or positive dream. And eventually the nightmare kind of subsides. So that's, in a nutshell, what imagery rehearsal therapy looks like.
that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to do some therapeutic lingo, guys. But like EMDR,
Yes,
the
I'm certified.
reprocessing, and I do ART, which is accelerated resolution therapy, which is eye movement processing therapy, and that's what we do. And so,
Yeah.
in a way, you're rehearsing it. They're training their brain to rehearse it in a different way, perhaps creating some new neural pathways, which then the
Absolutely.
brain can jump on that as opposed to the old ones. That's awesome. To go through that would be amazing. So there's hope, guys. If you're struggling with some nightmares, there's another therapy that you can do to help your brain to heal. Remember that any of those traumas, they're injuries. And so you want to heal the injury in a different way. And so this is a different way to heal the trauma. That's awesome.
I was just going to mention, I think that there are probably a lot of therapists out there who are very capable of providing this service, but maybe they just don't know about it. So if you
Mhm.
are already hooked in with a provider and you have that great relationship and you have that trust, and then you ask them about this and they're like, oh, I'm not really sure. The protocol, I believe, is free. It's very easy for them to get their hands on it. And there's not like this insane training or certification or anything that they need to go through. So if this is something that's of interest to you and you're already hooked in with a provider, bring it up to them, have that conversation, because it's really not going to be that challenging for them to work with you on this imagery rehearsal therapy protocol.
And guys, I will put that in the show notes, like as we go along and Leah's mentioning some of these things, make sure that you're referring back to the show notes, that if you're listening on your device, you just hit that little down arrow and it'll give you some of these things. I'll link to something and we'll find it and share it if that's something that you want to share with other people. I will be sharing that also on my social media, on my LinkedIn for sure, because my gosh, that's awesome. You mentioned this thing called sleep divorce, and I am so curious about this term. What the heck is sleep divorce?
People get very worked up about the term sleep divorce. Call it whatever you want. I've heard people say sleep alliance, whatever. Don't get caught up in the term divorce, because I think that people just get hung up on that. And I don't want you to get
Mhm.
hung up on that.
Yeah, it can be a scary
Basically,
term for people.
it can be a very scary term, and it's not meant to be stigmatizing. It's just a way to describe what's happening. Essentially, what happens, and I'm sure that a lot of your listeners can relate to this, is that we have a lot of issues whenever it comes to sharing a bed. While it's wonderful to share a bed, sometimes it can be very frustrating, because sometimes someone falls asleep really, really easily, and then the other one is up for hours, very jealously watching the other. Sometimes there are lots of issues with temperature preferences. And whenever it comes to officers, and this is something that I think is really important, just like a public service announcement, is snoring may be, and I highly encourage you to talk to your healthcare provider, it could be underlying obstructive sleep apnea. And
Mhm.
so that may also, maybe someone is already diagnosed and they're wearing a CPAP, which that can also be kind of loud and annoying. So there can be lots of different elements that make it difficult to share a bed.
My husband's snoring was related to his blood pressure. He
Okay.
got on blood pressure medication and stopped snoring.
And that's why I think whenever it comes to snoring, there's a lot of articles and things out there about like, just use a breathe right strip, or just do this, or keep
Yeah.
your mouth shut. Things like that blow me away. Please go
It's
talk
like a
to your
symptom of
healthcare
something
provider.
else, really. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Please go talk to your healthcare provider because it may be nothing, but it may also be something. And I'd rather you confront it head on and see what's exactly happening. So snoring is a big one, but also too, whenever we think about our first responders, their schedules sometimes are so unpredictable, and maybe the spouse schedule is or is not. So you may have people going to bed at different times. You may have people waking
Absolutely.
up at different times.
Yep.
And sometimes people sleep like a log and they sleep right through it and it's no big deal. Other people are incredibly light sleepers and they're awake and that's it. And there's no hope going back to bed. So I think that there's lots and lots of different elements. We don't need to get down this whole rabbit hole, but like if someone is sleepwalking, if they have restless leg, if they're tossing and turning, or maybe they're like a blanket hog, lots of different reasons why we might consider a sleep divorce.
Yeah, that
So,
makes sense to me. And, ironically, if you look back in time, at least on TV, right? They didn't
mm,
show couples sleeping in the same bed for decades, like 50s. And I think the Dick Van Dyke Show, they still had like twin beds, right? I'm dating myself, but I see it in reruns, right? But I mean, so the idea of sleeping in different rooms because you have different sleep habits, like, is it more important to get the quality sleep that you need? Or is it more important that you're right next to that person? And that's probably different for every couple. And
yeah,
also when you're considering our like law enforcement aspects, it kind of makes sense. So if I'm coming home at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and my partner's waking up and then they can't get back to sleep, how is that impacting them? Or vice versa, if I'm then waking up at 6:30 and you're 2 hours into sleeping, how is that impacting you? And are you gonna be able to get back to sleep? So I get what you're saying. It sounds scary initially. I was like, "Sleep divorce? What does this
yeah,
mean?" So,
yeah,
but that makes sense. It's basically this idea of when you're considering your sleep health,
mm,
what's necessary, what's best for your sleep health, what makes sense. It's not that I don't love you. It's not that I don't want to spend time with you, or it's not that we don't want to have sexy time. It's really a matter of, hey, we both need to get good quality sleep because it impacts our health and our mental health and our emotional health and our physical health. So that makes sense to
yeah,
me.
absolutely. And I think what you said several times there was sleep health. And I
Mhm.
think that is, you're hitting the nail on the head, it is about the health that touches all these other things. And there are ways that you can go about a sleep divorce. Like there are other alternatives. Maybe you sleep Scandinavian is one way that we call it, where that is maybe you have two beds because one person likes a firm bed and one person likes a soft bed. And you kind of have the
Ah.
mattresses next to each other.
Mhm.
And one has very heavy comforters because that's what they like. And the other one just has a sheet. So there's alternatives to work around. And I would say the furthest end of the extreme is the full sleep divorce where you both have your own bedrooms. And in that bedroom, it is, whatever your preferences are as far as the mattress and the covers and the level of darkness and the level of noise or silence. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But I think that the piece that people really need to take home is that this does not mean that your relationship is in trouble. This is all about you getting the quality sleep that you need in whatever way that looks like for you. And then you can make time for the relationship and quality time elsewhere. We're not cutting that out. We're just moving it somewhere else.
You saying this actually gives couples permission
Yes.
to have that conversation. And the way you laid it out there was like, hey, there's all these different ways to adjust. And
Yes.
understanding that everybody's a little bit different, that maybe I want the window cracked when it's 32 degrees, but my husband needs a bunch of blankets or has to wear, sweats to bed. I get that there's a conversation to be had. And unfortunately, I mean, because of what I do in my therapy room, right? And we have these conversations of like, I just need you to get a CPAP and quit. Well, your CPAP makes too much noise, or you're just snoring. Why
Mhm.
can't you just, I'm going to storm off onto the couch. And so
Yep.
instead of having that conversation, you're opening up a different kind of conversation to say, like, hey, sleep's different for everybody.
Exactly.
Let's talk about what we do to love each other and help each other get the right sleep, which is a really different conversation as opposed to resentment. right?
Yes.
So I appreciate you like bringing that to the table and opening that up as an actual thing that can be helpful for relationships. Yeah.
My pleasure. I think that the key word that you said there is resentment. I think that there can be so
Mhm.
much frustration and annoyance and resentment, but like quiet, underlying.
Yeah.
And if we can just address it
Like
head
lava.
on, I think we can really help the relationship dynamics without even doing anything else.
Yes. Leah, this has been incredible. I know that you have a book coming out and like we've just been talking for about 45 minutes about these things. So the fact that just in this short period of time, there's been so much that has been so helpful. Tell us about the book. When's it coming out? All the things.
Yeah, I am so excited. The book is supposed to be released this spring. The title is going to be The Sleep Advantage, and it is quite a very comprehensive book all about getting good sleep for first responders, but it also acts as a troubleshooting guide for if I can't fall asleep, if I'm awake in the middle of the night, if I have nightmares. So, a lot of the things that we talked about here, but just so much more. And I think that folks can really benefit because I think whenever it comes to sleep, we're like, oh, I already know what I need to do, or oh, my sleep has been this bad for how many years, it's never going to get better. But I've written it in such a way where I really do believe that you can get better sleep. And if you read the book and you follow the instructions, I know that you can get better sleep.
Oh my gosh. That's going to be amazing. I can't wait till it comes out.
I'm so
I'll
excited
make
too.
sure we'll stay in touch a little bit and I'll make sure to put it out. So, if you're listening to this, I will make sure to adjust the show notes and put the link in her book because I know that that's going to be helpful, like problem solving. So people could just go to problem
Yes.
solving and look at, hey, I'm having this problem. What do I need to do? That's going to be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think our conversation today just was like the tip of the iceberg. And if you're struggling and you're struggling with something that we didn't talk about today, like there's just so much content that I feel very confident you will take something away and you will be able to improve your sleep.
Is there a website that people need to be aware of? What's your
Yeah.
website?
My website is drleahkaylor.com.
And there you can find all the Leah Kaylor things with her book and her sleep and everything else that you need to do. Leah, thank you so much for coming on today. This was so incredibly helpful. I know everybody's going to benefit from it as well. Guys, if you liked this show, make sure you give me a thumbs up. You're on your little device. Just hit the like button. That really helps me. Or, you know what? If you're like somebody in your life is not sleeping well, or, maybe this is just helpful. Maybe you're part of a wellness group at work. This can be something that you share with them. And you could go to my blog and share the blog page or share the podcast directly. I would really appreciate that. We do this because we want to help impact law enforcement lives, mental and emotional health, relational health. And so, it's helpful if you share as well. There's only so much I can do. So, Leah, thank you for joining us again. I appreciate it. I know that we're all looking forward to your book.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And guys, until next time, keep it Code 4. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about the podcast or Cindy, check out code4couples.com. All intellectual property rights owned by CRLD2 Ventures, LLC, are protected by the firm of 9mm, 45 ACP, 5.56mm, and 12 gauge.